Long story short, jetpacks didn't exist. They definitely didn't exist. And the only ones that existed were back in the 1970s from the Army. And what they had was hydrogen peroxide that was 95% proof. And the stuff that you buy at the store and pour on like cuts and stuff is 5%. So that stuff will blow anything up, basically. It's a time bomb.
I'm Dan Meiji, CEO and co-founder of Firestorm. And today on the Drone Wars podcast, we're joined by Alex Bock, who leads the deep tech venture segment at Booz Allen Ventures. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
It's nice having, someone as smart as you who understands drones in San Diego. So I don't have to do this on a video call. Get you in person, IRL, as they say. Tell everyone a little bit about who Alex Bock is.
Yeah. So I'm Alex Bock, obviously. Currently work at Booz Allen Ventures, leading the deep tech vertical. A little bit of history on me is I'm from Southern California, grew up in a small ski town up about 2 hours north of here. Graduated with a mechanical engineering degree and decided, okay, hey, engineering's boring. I want to actually build stuff. I want to do things. So during that time, it's kind of funny. I saw this ad on I don't even know what it was. It was on a bridge. And so it said, hey, I want to design this 3-axis space chair. I'm like, okay, let's freaking do it.
A normal ad on a bridge?
Dude, 100%. I actually called my mom that same day. She's like, are you sure you want to reach out to us? I'm like, yeah, it says $40 an hour. Heck yeah, let's do it. So that actually then led into my first company, which is a medical device company. Met up with this super interesting neurologist down here in San Diego. And he said, hey, I need to figure out how to diagnose and treat dizziness. And so I was like, okay, cool. How do we do that? And he's like, okay, you sit a person in this chair, you have 3 axes, and then you flip them around super fast. It's like, okay, well, how does that even work? How does that treat dizziness or treat gait issues or balance? He's like, no, actually inside your inner ear is a small little gyro.
Little crystal.
Little crystals. There you go. And so long story short is we spent about 2 years and a decent amount of money trying to build this chair. And what was really hard about it, which I didn't know, because again, growing up in a small town, I didn't really understand what the federal government was it's really, really hard to get a medical device through. And so scrapped the chair idea because it was this huge machine and you put 80-year-olds on it, they puke and then stuff happens.
Sounds safe.
It sounds super safe. And so we're like, okay, we're going to put it all into an iPhone. Sounds even better, right? Sounds super safe. You just strap it to your face and you're done. So did that. And then we took it to the FDA and we said, hey, here's our iPhone that will fix 70% of people. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be super nice. And now all these people are going to be fixed from dizziness. They came back and said, hey, that's great. We love your app, but you need to run electromagnetic testing on the iPhone when the app is running. And I looked them in the face and said, how, my app, what's the difference between my app and the messaging app? And they said, well, your app wasn't running. I was like, well, Apple has all these reports already done. Why wouldn't I just give them to you? And they're like, oh, no, your app wasn't running. So
you basically said, would that be a category 2 device?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
Right? Because it has electromagnetic.
But the thing is they made me, as a small startup, it was 2 guys in a garage, go back, do this EMC testing for $500K. And the funniest thing is the reports, if you lay them right on top of each other, were exact perfect lines, exact perfect overlays.
That is incredible.
And so you look at it and you're like, wow, I'm glad that I proved Apple, large corporate, correct on what their EMC testing is.
I know. Well, that would have been funny is what if it wasn't correct?
Well, that would have been real weird. But yeah, so long story short is we then got that through and then we looked at each other like, oh, cool, we submitted it. And they're like, oh, it's going to be another 3.5 years until your app can go on the market. And we looked at each other, me and Dr. Purcell, my co-founder, and we were like, okay, what do we do for 3 years? And he's like, well, I like aviation. I was like, sick. I like aviation too. I'm a mechanical aerospace engineer. He's like, let's build jetpacks. And I was like, oh, okay. Cool. We can build jetpacks. It's real. There's Iron Man and a bunch of other things. Yeah, jetpack.
From 3-axis chairs to iPhones to jetpacks.
Yeah, exactly. Long story short, jetpacks didn't exist.
Yep.
They definitely didn't exist. And the only ones that existed were back in the 1970s from the Army. And what they had was hydrogen peroxide that was 95% proof. And the stuff that you buy at the store and pour on like cuts and stuff is 5%. So that stuff will blow anything up, basically. It's a time bomb. Anything organic, you pour it on top, it just lights on fire.
Are those the jetpacks? When you look at the old footage, they're like this,
Exactly.
locked in.
Exactly.
And they're like
They're actually called rocket belts. And so we're like, you know what? Let's take this super, super sketchy fluid, put it on our back, and then let's go fly. It's like, cool, let's do it. And then we looked at each other, we're like, where are we going to fly? And they're like, let's go fly down by the border. So there you go. So where all the things happen. So we started building that out, and then we realized with these rocket belts, you only can fly for 21 seconds. And I don't know if you guys have been up in the air before, but when you're shooting up 100 feet for 21 seconds, it's an emergency landing every single time, because if you fall from 6 feet, you could die. You could die. And so you basically get shot up, you can fly over and then come down and land. We're like, that's not that sexy. That's not super fun. Let's strap turbines to our back. And so then that led us down another road of strapping micro turbines, so turbojet engines, on our back, flying around with kerosene and getting about a 10 to 12 minute flight. So then that led us down a whole different road. But long story short is we then teamed up with Jetpack Aviation, which is a great company, and got sponsored by Red Bull, flew these jetpacks around for the F1, which was super fun. Being the CTO, kind of scary because I'm watching the CEO fly around and hoping he doesn't crash.
Please don't die.
Yeah, that was the best. And then spent some time doing that, and then took it to, the federal government and said, hey, the warfighter needs jetpacks. Like, if you look at anybody in the face who's especially a special operations soldier, and you say, hey, I can give you jetpacks, they basically shit themselves. They say, this is exactly what I need. This is so sick. I want one right now.
Please.
Yeah, exactly.
And can you make it matte black?
Exactly. The thing is with that is, when we said, heck yeah, we'll build it for you. That's going to be $1 million each. Let's do it. Let's, sign the check here. Let's go. They said, oh, actually, you have to go talk to the acquisition guys, and then you guys have to go talk to Big Brass to get it into the POM, to then get into the budget, and then maybe we could buy it in 3 years. And then we look at each other, we're like, but you guys want it. We want to sell it to you. Why can't we just trade the money? And they're like, that's not how it works.
Yep.
And so then that led me down the whole path of wow, if we can't get jetpacks into the federal government, which maybe I'm biased, is the sexiest thing that's out there.
Pretty low-hanging fruit.
Pretty low-hanging fruit, right? How are we supposed to get cyber tools or CRM tools or even little tools that help the IRS do their job better when most people don't even care about that, right? And so that led me down the path of going to figure out if this startup mentality or this agile mentality lives in the primes. So spent about 4 years at Northrop Grumman, mostly on the Hail platforms, so the large scale drone platforms, and it wasn't there. And so we're like, okay, let's bring it back. How do we actually hack this system? How do we actually fund these companies to make sure that they can deliver this technology to the federal government and be able to actually have the best technology to deliver to the federal government?
Totally. And so how did you end up at Booz?
Yeah, so how I ended up at Booz is basically came over there from Northrop Grumman. At Northrop Grumman, again, like I was saying, I was leading the autonomy efforts for the Hail platforms. So all the command and control and all that fun stuff. But realized the classified programs were not as sexy as I thought they were, right? I thought they were going to be the SR-71. I thought it was going to be Skunk Works.
Yeah.
But they still have the same issues that everybody else does. For me, it was okay, how do we break this? How do we fix it, right? How do we actually bridge this valley of death? How could we actually get these startups money, but also provide value to bring them to the federal government rather than being oh, hey, here's $10 million, peace, see you later, come back for a Series A or Series B, and then we'll talk then.
Drone Wars is recorded from Firestorm's global HQ in San Diego. From our custom-built studio inside one of our hero products, a modular industrial-grade manufacturing facility designed to be deployed anywhere in the world within 24 hours for on-demand drone production. Each week on the podcast, we bring you cutting-edge insights from top industry leaders, sharing the breakthroughs and technologies they're working on, the hard lessons they've learned, and bold predictions that they have for the next 5 to 10 years in autonomous systems and advanced manufacturing. Enjoying the show so far? Then be sure you like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, back to the show.
Okay, so at Booz, you probably get to see a lot of different technologies. What are you kind of the most excited about right now?
Yeah. There's a lot to be excited about right now, right? With space, obviously, speeding up. I don't know if you've seen the Starship launches, but they're absolutely insane. From that to AI, right? I really get interested in saying, okay, hey, what's the next warfighting domain, right? Is that going to be Indo-Pacific? Is that going to be up in space? Is that going to be somewhere else underground? I don't know. And what technologies do we need to work on today to be able to enable that in the next 2 to 3 years, right? And so that's really the best part about Booz Allen Ventures is really we can reach back to the warfighter and say, hey, what are you guys excited about? And talk on their terms, talk in their areas, and not be an outsider, right? Be in the same area, in the same clothing, and understand that we've worked on the same projects together and say, okay, seriously, where are we going to be at in the next 2 years? How do we enable you guys to be able to have the best technology, not the easiest technology, and have that in your hands and be ready for you to fight the war that's coming in the next, couple of years or 10 years.
And how does your background as an operator turned VC kind of allow you to navigate what can be actually complicated at times, which is understanding kind of where product needs to go or what product needs to even be? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'd say that's one of the hardest parts about my job today is taking an early stage company. So we invest in early stage companies, seed to Series B, and trying to merge them with a 35,000 person consulting company that works with the federal government, right? And so really looking at it and saying, okay, how do we be this third party to make sure they're talking on the same terms, using the same acronyms, and not pissing each other off, right? Because if you can just get that, if you can get over that low hanging fruit and that low bar of just getting them in the room together and speaking on the same terms, really exciting stuff happens after that.
Could you give us 1 or 2 examples of companies where you've made this happen?
Yeah. So, some really interesting stuff that we're doing with a couple of our portfolio companies is, so for example, the first one that comes to mind for me is Albedo. So Albedo Space, Topher and the team out in Colorado and Texas, they're creating a VLEO platform, so very low Earth orbit imaging platform, which is super, super interesting for a million different use cases, right? The thing is with that is, as you can imagine, if you can 10x the resolution or even 5x the resolution or even 2x the resolution of what's actually out there today, there is a million different use cases across the federal government, all the way from DOD to IC, all the way to civil, right? But as an early stage startup, how do you even look at that and say, where do I start? Who do I talk to first? What are the requirements? What do I build to? Right. And as an early stage startup, if you can't even have the conversation of okay, what requirements are you going to put inside the POM, inside the FIDIP in the next, 5 to 6 years, how are you supposed to know what to build to? And so really just helping our companies and helping, for example, Albedo and saying, hey guys, maybe we should start working towards XYZ product, or hey, let's get you in front of these people because you need to start working on your cyber capabilities to then work on this contract that's coming in the next 3 years.
Right. So do you guys have an internal process that you've kind of basically turned into something that can be replicated at speed? Or how does Booz kind of help, product get to end user?
So our post-investment process is probably the hardest thing, right? Because again, you're trying to merge early stage technology, early stage founders with a large corporate, and a large corporate that then works with the federal government, right? And so the process isn't super hammered out, but I think if the process was hammered out, that'd be a bad thing. Because as you know, as an early stage startup, you kind of have to pivot a lot. You kind of have to say, go knock on this door. Oh, you don't answer. Okay, go knock on this door. Oh, you don't answer. Oh, hey, this random guy over here that's in this department that I've never heard of wants to talk to me. Let's go start there. Right. And then that'll increase our probability to then get into big Army or big Navy or SOCOM or whatever else.
We like to call that the pockets of misfits that actually made 100% DOD.
100%. But again, if you haven't been in the DOD, if you haven't been in the federal government and you're starting from scratch, which most people are, especially people who are working on the sexiest, coolest tech as of today, you don't know where to start. You don't know where to start. So just having the big brother that is Booz Allen, being able to just guide and be able to answer questions over Slack of hey, I've never even heard of this contract. How are you guys tracking it? Or did you go to this conference? What did they say in this conference?
Yep.
That's really the value, right? Rather than like, oh, we're going to put you on this $1 billion IDIQ and you're going to then get on all these task orders. Like, no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. It's really like, okay, let's provide guidance to help build these companies so then they can get onto that IDIQ or get their own IDIQ in the next couple of years.
So let's pivot the discussion a little bit
of course.
here. Talk to me about what do you see right now in autonomous and semi-autonomous systems, and where do you think that's going in the short term?
I don't think it has to be said, but in the next 2 to 3 years is going to be a very interesting time in the Indo-Pacific, right? And the startups that have emerged that are attacking that area is very, very interesting. The thing is with that is, as we've seen in Ukraine, it's about being attritable, right? But it's also about playing the game that is the game that the US will play, not the game that Ukraine's going to play, right? And I really do see that being in data aggregation, the whole kill chain, trying to understand, okay, how do I communicate to all these different drones? How do I then combine this data? And then how do I get that data back to the warfighter? And doing that whole loop and doing it as quick as possible and doing it faster than our adversary is what's going to matter. But at the same time, as you know, to get out there, because it is so far of a distance, you have to have a attritable mass and you have to have a lot of stuff and you have to do stuff at the edge, right? So if you can't even enable that OODA loop to work, if you can't even enable that whole communication pipeline to work because you don't have the stuff in the theater that we're talking about, then it's impossible, right? So there's almost like a barbell approach of like, you need the picks and shovels of the drone hardware. You need the whole range of it from maritime to air to ground, but you also need the infrastructure that'll bring it back to the people that matter, that make decisions. Because realistically, there's not going to be people that are flying FPV drones and just flying them into tanks. That's not how the US plays. And that's not how the US fights wars. And so how do you then take that information from your ISR and then bring it back and then make those decisions quickly?
So you just described a lot of things having to work well for us to be successful
100%.
In a scenario that is hopefully worst case, right? When you sit in these meetings with end customers, are you excited by how they're trying to tackle the problem? Are you worried? Is it still an education process? Where do you think we are collectively across the DoD and how we're going to try and tackle Indo-PACOM? And you obviously, maybe you can only answer some of those questions.
Well, yeah, and set the record straight too. That is one of the best things that comes with Booz Allen Ventures is just looping back to Booz Allen and having the people within Booz Allen who are meeting with the client every single day. But from what I've been hearing and what I've experienced is it's not a technology problem, right? We have all the technology out there, and the commercial sector has all this super advanced technology that's advancing very, very quickly. It's an acquisition problem, right? So everybody acknowledges that we need new technology. Everybody acknowledges that the technology exists and has these really cool ideas on how to do it. But then they all kind of look at each other and say, how are we going to buy it? And that's where it falls apart.
It's a little bit of that Spider-Man meme, right?
100%. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, right?
All right. So I like to kind of have people take a moment and reflect, right? And so like you've had a very interesting career to where you are today. What would you tell yourself 10 years ago when you were starting the entrepreneurial and then VC journey?
I would say changing the world is hard. It's very, very hard, right? And it gets harder as you get older, right? The risk curve goes way up. People have families, people get settled down. So what I would tell myself when I was younger is just take all the risk you can. Pile on the risk early because that's the time to fail in life. Is when you're young, when you don't have all these obligations, right? When you don't have a family to care for, you can go move to San Francisco and take those risks. You can go move and sit with the customers for 3 months and take those risks. And I think it's the same thing with the company is you have to take the risks early on in the company's journey because it's only going to get exponentially harder when the the employee base grows, when you have more investors breathing down your neck, when you have more customers banging on your door and saying, hey, I need this functionality, it just gets exponentially harder as time goes on.
All right. So changing gears a little bit here. Talk to me about where you think autonomous systems are a decade from now. What will we be seeing? What will we be talking about? Look into the magic ball here and tell us what you think is going to happen.
Yeah. And again, I'm a little biased because I came from Northrop and worked on the Triton and Global Hawk, which is a Group 5 high altitude drone. This is the big boys. But what I would love to see is really a scaling of all classes of drones and really having use cases for all those classes of drones, right? I don't think all quadcopters are going to win the war. I don't think all fixed wings are going to win the war. It's just really having that full stack capability and being able to operate together, right? But at the same time, I think what's going to be really important, and obviously you guys know this really, really well, is having something that can change, right? The biggest thing that hurt my heart at Northrop was looking at a 20-year-old UAV and not being able to change lines of code on it because it was too hard to go through the process of changing lines of code, doing testing, and going through the whole artifact process, even though it needed to be changed. So creating these systems that have that open architecture that you could then switch in a sensor from being, oh, I need ISR today. Oh, I need EW. Oh, I need an end effector. Being able to do that and do that quickly and enabling the warfighter, enabling the end client to be able to do that by themselves without having to come back to you, I think that's where it's really going.
I want to pull on a thread there for a second.
Yeah.
3 weeks ago, I was in DC and we're talking to a bunch of folks in the House and Senate side of things.
Mm-hmm.
The primes are now coming to them and telling them that if they want modularity, it's going to be substantially more expensive. What problem does that set us up for in the future?
Because lobbying is very important, and lobbying and being in people's offices is very important. Once you have their ear, it's very hard to change their mind. I think a lot of startups are actually setting the precedent that that's not the case, right? Like you guys and or others, they're setting the case that, no, you want something different? Okay, we'll modify it and we'll put it on your doorstep and it'll be ready to go. It doesn't cost more money. We're actually taking that R&D risk, right? So when you start taking R&D risk and when you actually start putting together these systems by yourself and rather doing it that way versus, making the taxpayer pay for it on a cost plus program, then of course it's going to be easy. Of course it's going to be cheaper, right? But if you go back to them, and what they're probably doing is going back to them and saying, hey, we actually need a new cost plus program or a new task order under this IDIQ to then enable our teams to be able to go do it. And then it takes 2 years to do that. Of course, it's going to be more expensive. Why wouldn't it be?
Right. No, I mean, I think that's a great little point here. And that's, if you're doing it, show it to the end user, show it to Congress, get your lobbyist and fight that thought, right? Yeah. I've tried to frame it to them in like a commercial sense, right? You're not buying a new iPhone for every app you use. You're buying one iPhone and putting different apps on it. And they're like, yeah, of course. I'm like, okay. You know what I mean? So framing the discussion can also be pretty important.
The hardest part with that is, again, you have the triad of buying technology within the federal government. So even if you produce the thing and it's the sexiest drone you've ever made, you go put it in a theater or you go bring it to a demo and the warfighter's using it, they love it. They don't have the purchasing power, right? So that's where it gets really interesting of working with, okay, what PEOs are we going to? What program managers are we going to? How are we going to work with them so they're prepared to then take the call from the warfighter when they say they love it and be like, oh, we've heard of that too, sick, let's go in on it. Yeah. Right. And then long-term planning from the top down with big brass and saying, hey, your warfighter's playing with it. You should really like this too. I'm like, oh, wow. Like I touched it, I felt it. This is great. Right. And so being able to work it in each one of those directions is going to be, it already is very, very important. And that's where I think a lot of people, especially on the startup side, are falling down, is just saying, we're making the coolest, sexiest, best tech, and then putting it into theater or dropping it at the warfighter's doorstep. And that's cool. But again, with my jetpack experience, it doesn't work, unfortunately.
You heard it here first. The best product does not win. Bring you sail to the DOT.
I wish it did. Yeah, I do think that there is a future where that is.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's totally outside of mine and your hands for it to get there.
Yeah.
But if we just complain about the acquisition process and not just work with what we're given right now, we're doing our companies and ourselves a disservice because we're not going to be able to single-handedly change this stuff.
Well, and with that being said, the acquisition process is changing.
Totally.
It's really exciting where it's going, right? If you look at like DIU's budget for next year, right, it's already multiplying.
Yeah,
right.
You got a number, man.
They are looking at it and saying, okay, cool. How do we enable DIU as well as others like the combat commandants, right? And just saying, hey, how do we actually then create a market? How do we actually create competition, right? And then once you have competition of like, oh, hey, SOCOM has this. Oh, hey, why don't we have this? That's where people start getting excited, and that's where technology starts to win out, right?
Alex, thanks for taking the time today. If we wanted to follow you or reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you or find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn. Yeah, find me there.
Cool. What's your handle for Twitter?
Just search Alex Bock, you'll find me.
There's only one Alex Bock in the whole world.
Yeah, there's only one, and it's me.
Yeah, it's him. Exactly.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week, we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes every Tuesday wherever podcasts can be found. Until then, we'll see you next time.